All right, everybody in the Code 3 community, welcome back. Today, we're going to have a little bit more of an in-depth video on the generational freedom piece. You hear me talk about investing in real assets required by real people in the real economy to protect generational freedom. I'm going to talk about that a little bit and how central planning can affect a lot of, or I should say central planners can affect a lot of people by influencing the few. In other words, the few can influence the many. Therefore, the few can affect the many. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as it relates to the financial system. We're not going to go super into the weeds as far as the history of the financial system or anything like that. But I think with some graphics we have and so forth, it'll really make some sense. So this will be a two-part video series. The first part will be this one, obviously. And the second one will focus on decentralized assets, and we'll hit on that here a little bit in this video, but it'll follow up on the second. So make sure you watch both videos. Let me share my screen here. We'll get after it. Okay. Generational freedom, protecting generational freedom. That's always the lead of our mission statement. We do that through strategic relationships, advanced tax strategies, and wealth building investment opportunities. Whoops. Sorry. I didn't have the right screen selected there. Apologize. So we always start our videos with an operational briefing. Most of you have seen this in the past. Starts with the mission statements, and then we go over tactics, techniques, and procedures. For those who watch the video, you know that the tactic is what we're trying to accomplish, the techniques, how we're trying to accomplish it, and the procedure is something that we do to enhance our ability to accomplish the technique and therefore the tactics. So you see today, the procedure is largely what we're going to be talking about today, and that's to reduce our exposure to fatal funnels in our investment strategy. So why do I say fatal funnels? As many of you know, and is indicated by the reports here on the screen, I have a background in emergency services as well as tactics and the tactical training environment. Quite a few years in that. And these three reports that you can get by sending an email to SWAT@code3assets.com. Again, that's SWAT@code3assets.com. It'll talk about how we employ some of the experiences learned in that environment in our business and investing lives to include in our own life. So in that background, a fatal funnel, when you're doing something in an environment that could turn lethal, it's something that funnels all of the resources into a very confined, predictable location. So from a tactical perspective, if you're moving through a hallway or you're going through a door or anything like that, you don't want to stay in those areas very long. So teams train to either navigate those more safely using a number of tools. I'm not going to really go into the weeds on that here because it's kind of irrelevant, but the biggest thing they want to do is they want to get out of those areas. You don't want to hang out in a doorway or in a hallway or anything like that people on the other side, the adversary, can predict you're coming through that area or from a particular area. And again, it's a fatal funnel. It's fatal because it can kill you. And it's a funnel because everything that flows from a large area bottlenecks into that one location. Well, same thing kind of applies as it relates to economics and freedom. And that's what we're going to cover here today. So on this one, we're not going to go into the history on taxes and back to when the country was founded and that sort of thing. But I guess just basically, there was a time when we had the real economy had ups and downs. Asset prices resembled the performance of the real economy. So if the economy is doing well and people had surplus, they had excess after they paid for all their have-to-haves, they would go out and acquire assets. Maybe that'd be a second home, maybe that would be stocks, bonds, whatever. And their asset portfolio or their investment portfolio would grow as the economy grew, because as the economy grows, the real economy, people would have more surplus, and they would put that surplus into things that would therefore try to create more surplus. So the asset markets used to kind of reflect the real economy a little bit better, but the real economy was the main thing, and the asset prices were more of a byproduct of the real economy. Back then, governments budgeted and spent money that was collected in the form of tax from the people. And obviously they borrowed money. They did that through bonds and issuance of bonds and so forth. And that still happens. So I'm not trying to say this is a 100% all inclusive lesson on the history of finance and government operations and so forth. But I'm going to illustrate here kind of how it changed, how our financial system changed, and why that makes the mass numbers of people shown here on the right side of the screen vulnerable, or it certainly could. Now, I want to be clear, this video is not political. It's completely apolitical. It doesn't matter which party's in charge. I think we would all agree that it doesn't matter anymore. It's become so divided that either side is more focused on winning than maybe the good of the people sometimes. So you have to wonder, what will they do when they start to perceive that they aren't going to win, especially when we start talking career politicians, people that spend decades there. That's their entire career. When that's your whole life, do you really want to lose it? It's no different than if you're a nurse. If all you know is nursing and your entire background and training is in nursing, do you really want to have that stripped away from you? Well, probably not. So it's no different. This is not a political presentation. It's just a presentation based on finances and to illustrate how the economy or economics, especially your personal economics, can subject you to things that maybe you don't want to partake in. So therefore, it is by definition or it could be by definition a threat to your individual freedoms and liberties. So essentially, there's a pipeline anymore that essentially flows money from, I call them the central planners, much like George Gammon. I actually learned that from him. So if you're not following George Gammon, you certainly should be. But, central planners, people that think they can make decisions for you better than you can for yourself, whether that's central bankers, politicians, whatever. People that think they are smarter than us, therefore they should make decisions for us for the betterment of the whole. Well, what happens is over the years, a really highly engineered financial system started developing, probably in the 70s, but especially in the 80s and 90s. And all that led up to the great financial crisis of 2008. Then we got into quantitative easing. And then the federal government started injecting money into the economy that really wasn't borrowed from the people. It was just creating more money. So you hear that people referred to as printing money. So um, that's essentially what happened. And you gotta realize that as the money started flowing through the pipeline, it would be very easy for people to control that pipeline. That becomes the fatal funnel. And when that money started flowing and they started creating all this money, think about it. After 2008, the stock market, and I'm not talking right after 2008, I'm talking over, what are we talking here? 14 years now. This is recorded in 2022. The stock market just started going up, 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 up. And in the last about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, something like that, it's about doubled. Went from 17,000 or so up to 35,000. Well, isn't that something that it even did that during a time that the entire economy was shut down for the illness that went around? So, what was happening is money was being created. It was flowing through the pipeline, getting to the people, and then it ends up in assets eventually. And some of that's from going through the people, some of that's through going through various other entities or organizations, but essentially it gets from the central planners out to the economy or out to the people, circulates around, and then it gets into asset prices. And then we see high asset prices, we see them inflate. And our financial system now is an entirely debt-based system. And we're going to bring some guests in the future that'll really explain that well. But once you understand it's a debt-based system and it requires inflation, in a debt-based system, you don't want lack of inflation or especially deflation. You want inflation so that it will dissolve the debt. And if you don't fully understand that right now, that's fine. We will do some videos on that in the future, but I just want you to understand the system requires inflation. Therefore, the system requires that money to flow through that pipeline from the central planners to the people. That inflates asset prices, stocks, pension plans, 401ks. It has a wealth effect meaning people feel wealthier because they see these giant numbers on the paper. So what do? They go spend money. What does that do? It grows the economy. Everybody's happy. So everybody's happy as long as asset prices are going up. But when asset prices go down, people won't be happy. And when you think about it, what I'm illustrating here is the fatal funnel as it relates to the financial system and this relationship between the central planners and the people. The fatal funnel's in that pipeline. Because if they cut off, if they do things that just make sense for the real economy, maybe they raise interest rates quite a bit in a very inflationary environment like we are right now in the end of January 2022, that will have major disruptions, if not destruction, through the financial system. So, they start to kind of tailor how open that valve is there pictured, or how closed that valve is. Well, my point is, looking into the future, looking at probabilities. If you want to control mass numbers of people, you just have to make them hurt a little bit, because typically if you put a little pressure or pain on people, they will generally, not all but most, will submit. So if you look at it, I mean, here we are at the end of January 2022. There's a big buildup in Ukraine. And, everybody's wondering, is Russia going to invade Ukraine? And what are we going to do in response to it? Well, why are some people not outspoken, maybe as others are in Europe? Probably because Russia supplies an enormous amount of natural gas through a pipeline, and they can just turn it off in the dead of winter. So that's my point. They would be the equivalent of the central planner for this particular discussion, and all the people in Europe they supply would be the equivalent of the people. So what you can do is, if you don't get your way, it gives you power and control. You just close the valve. Well, the same thing here. If everybody knows, and I'm not saying that this is happening yet, but if the central planners want us to do something, and maybe we don't want to do it, whether that's a personal choice, something in the economy, so whatever the case may be, maybe they're picking winners and losers, haves, have-nots, I don't know. They can simply target particular portions of the economy and maybe close that valve a little bit and create a little bit of pressure. Certainly, um, whether you're pro or anti-medicine's irrelevant. I really don't care. I'm just saying that there's been a number of people that have been for or against that particular mandate. And how were they regulating it? They were regulating it through employers and large corporations and things such as this. Essentially, they were threatening you with your job. So in other words, they could close the valve and make you hurt, put some pressure on you, and you will comply. It's basic tactics. It's no different than dealing with a barricaded individual in a home in a SWAT environment. What do? We change their environment. If they won't come out, we don't go in there. We change their environment, put some pressure on them to make them seek a more comfortable environment. This has been around since the beginning of human history, and that's why I want to be clear. This is not a political statement. This is just how you control human behavior, and it's been true for hundreds of years. And that's essentially what the risk would be or it could be in a system like this. So we just want you to understand that the fatal funnel is when your livelihood relies on very few people, and those few people can influence a handful of people that can affect the many. And that's what we're illustrating here. So if you just look at in the top right corner there, how freedom is defined. You're exempt from external control or interference or regulation. That's the definition of freedom, and that's why it fits our mission statement. So ways you can do that is control real things required by real people in the real economy, like housing, food, energy, necessary services. Those things are going to be around. They're going to be required by people. So it's going to be harder to control those things. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done, but if you decentralize that, or if more people, if it's a collective effort, and we as a citizenry decentralized our investment portfolios, it can really mitigate the risk or the number of fatal funnels we could be exposed to. And that's the generational freedom piece. So not only do we want to build wealth, cut taxes, we want to preserve generational freedom, because history tells us one thing. When the mass numbers of people turn over control of the stuff that's needed to the few, human history says over time, good things do not happen. So whether or not that's happening now, I don't know. But it certainly can happen in the future. And as our central planning institutions continue to grow and wealth divides to continue to grow and so forth, it becomes much, much easier to do. So that's what we're trying to get across here. So that kind of begs the question, what is decentralized? Well, that's what's in video number 2. So you'll have to come back and watch video number 2. But I just want you to understand, think about fatal funnels not only in your life, but in your investing life. And I ask yourself, are you at risk to that? Are you exposing yourself to people that are wanting more power and control to preserve their lifelong careers or whatever they do? Are you exposing yourself to these folks, um, or are you decentralized? So we'll go over the decentralized piece in video number 2. So what can you do now? For anybody that's got the reports that we mentioned in the first slide, you know that in there we talk about when, what's important now. That's what the acronym stands for. We use it in the tactical community all the time. You look at a giant problem, you say, what's important now? You weigh that against some pre-decided decision-making matrices, excuse me, and you answer the question, and then you just keep asking the same question. Eventually the situation will resolve. Where it gets all messed up is when you start doing things that aren't most important right now. So if you want to learn more about that type of stuff and really see some parallels to what we're drawing here, you just send an email to SWAT@code3assets.com. You'll get those 3 free reports. Absolutely no obligation there. So happy to have you do that. And what else can you do? What's your win? What's important now? Well, you can get more informed. You can remain informed, grow your education, um, try to plug into communities that are paying attention, and maybe you can see things coming before they get here. You can do that by sending an email to community@code3assets.com. Again, that's community@code3assets.com. There's no obligation, totally free. We share information like this, and we're all about growing a community, everybody kind of moving in the same direction together so we can all build wealth, cut taxes, protect generational freedom. We'll see you on the next video.